was during the 1950s. It occurred in Korea, and the man's name was Kim. He was about 19 years old. They didn't have very much at that point, but he was very fortunate, for he got a job. This job was with a group of soldiers. They were able to rent a house, and Kim was the one who looked after them. He supplied their food, he cleaned some of their houses, he did errands for them, and he was a very polite man. He was humble, he did whatever they asked him to do, and he was an overall good guy. Because of this, and the soldiers were being young and rather foolish, they began to do things on Kim they shouldn't have done. They started playing tricks on him, making him a brunt of their jokes. One day he came in and he went to get his sandals, and they were nailed to the floor. What he did was simply this. He went out, he got a pair of pliers, he pulled the nails out, he chuckled, and he walked away. Another day, well, many days, he came in, opened the door, and there was a pail of water there, and he was drenched. But he took it all good-naturedly, and no matter what they plotted against him, he was able just to let it roll off. And one day, the soldiers got guilty and said, "We shouldn't be doing this to Kim." And so they called him to them, and they said, "We're sorry for what we've done, and we're not going to do it anymore." And Kim didn't really trust them, and he said, "You mean no more nailing of the shoes to the floor? No, no more of that. No more water over the door so I'll get drenched. No, we're not going to do anything like that again." And Kim thought for a minute, and he said, "Oh, then I won't spit in the soup anymore." The soldiers plotted. Kim probably saw what was happening, but they didn't realize what he was doing. Sometimes we don't see the plots, but Jesus knew what the plot was against him. He knew that the Sanhedrin were going to kill him. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to suffer. And so we have part of this plot unfolding before us in our passage from John chapter 11, 46 to 57. So let's look at it. And the first thing we need to look at is the indecision. You know what it's like to not being able to make up your mind. You can't go forward, you can't go back, you can't go sideways. It's like being in a snowbank in the wintertime. You start spinning your wheels and you don't get anywhere, or you get into some of this little clay around here. When it's wet, you just can't move. And that's the way they were with Jesus. The Sanhedrin were the highest court of highest position you could have in power besides the Romans. And they had tried to ignore Christ. They did send out their spies to find out what he was doing. They knew approximately what he was doing. They questioned why he was able to do this and why he did it and why he thought he had the authority to do it. After all, they were the authority in the land. And Christ didn't seem to worry about this at all. In fact, all he seemed to do is do more and more and more. He would heal the sick. The blind would see. The lame would walk. People would be raised from their beds from sickness. He would free people from evil demons, and he would talk to people about God in such a way that people were attracted to him, and not only attracted to him, but they flocked to him. And when they thought that nothing else could happen, something did. And the context of our passage is what happened. He raised Lazarus from the dead. And so they came back and they said, "What are we going to do?" They had a decision at that point, like each one of us has a decision. The biggest decision that we need to make in our life is, what do we do with Jesus Christ? Do we ignore him? Do we oppose him? Or do we follow him? And they had a bit of indecision. Then there is the winning speech. How many here like to go to meetings? I don't see too many hands up. Why do we like to go to meetings? We don't like going to meetings because of that indecision. Seats get hard. You know what people want to say, but they don't want to say it at times. And it just goes on and on. And you think to yourself, will it ever end? And then something happens. Somebody says something. And when they say that thing, they're motivated by it, they have good reasoning, and it makes sense to everybody, and a decision is made, and all of a sudden the meeting's over. Well, that's what happened here in the Sanhedrin. And the man who made the winning speech, or the suggestion, was the high priest, Caiaphas himself. And the speech that he made wasn't exactly what you would call full of flattery. He didn't try to ease himself in. What he said was simply this: you don't know anything. Now, if I said that to you or somebody else said that to you, what would you think? Well, I'll tell him a thing or two. But they didn't. Because he made sense. He may have gone about it the wrong way, but he said, let's think about this. What would be the best way of letting the waters not get too rough? Would it be to have one person die, or have the whole nation perish? Here's what we're looking at. If Jesus continues to do what he's doing right now, you are in trouble. I'm in trouble. The whole nation's in trouble. The Romans will finally find out about Jesus, the crowds he's gathering, and they're going to do something, and we may be destroyed. We're going to lose our position. We're going to lose our power, our wealth. So why don't we save our own skins, take the easy way out, and get rid of Christ? And you know there are many people doing the same thing. They take the easy way out. It's not following Christ. That's the hard way. But there are times when you can't ignore Christ. And therefore there are people who say, well, there's no absolutes anymore. Since there's no absolutes, there's no God. Then they say, well, God didn't create the heavens and the earth, so there isn't a God, so we don't need to deal with him. Jesus wasn't really a real person. Or if he was a real person, well, he didn't do what he said he was going to do. He's not here today. And then there was the plan itself. And the plan itself was quite easy, wasn't it? And Caiaphas liked the plan because he didn't like Christ. Most of us know John 3:16. But if you go farther on in John 3:16, it says these words: everyone who believes Christ is not condemned, but everyone who does not believe in him is condemned already because he does not believe in the one and only Son. This is the verdict. The light has come into the world, and man loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. One who lives in darkness, hates the light, and does not come to the light, for fear his deeds will be exposed. And that's what Jesus was doing. He was exposing the Sanhedrin and the people in it. They said, we know the law. And Jesus, they knew the heart of the law. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. And to love your neighbor as yourself. They said, here's who God is. And Jesus knew God. And he talked to them about God. Not the Sanhedrin, but others about God. And that reflected badly on the Sanhedrin and the high priest. And anyway, the high priest didn't have his position the right way. Caiaphas bought the position of the high priest. Caiaphas made money because in the temple area, what was happening was there was a temple tax, there was a temple coin, and to buy something in the temple, and you had to do it there, talk about a monopoly. You had to exchange your money into the temple coins, and they charged you a high rate to do so. So Jesus had called the Pharisees white sepulchres. They're hollow inside. He drove out the money changers in the temple and the sheep and the doves. So you see why Caiaphas wasn't very happy with Jesus? And there are some people who aren't very happy either. Because they know, Jesus knows what they've done, and they don't want to have anything to do with Christ because of that. They can't see that Jesus is saying, this is what you've done, so come to me. So the plot was made. We'll get rid of Jesus. But think for a moment what they were trying to do. Psalm 2 was read, and it talks about the same thing happening. Let us get rid of their chains and throw off their feathers. And what does God say? God from heaven laughs at them. He scoffs them. In his wrath and anger says, I have already installed my king on Zion, my holy hill. They weren't the rulers. They weren't the king. They weren't the Lord. They were in power, but they had taken it. And they had not used it properly in the way God wanted it to be used. And they were plotting against God himself. So what was the result? Decisions always have a consequence. And in this case, it did. But there's a very interesting thing happening here. Even though Caiaphas hated Christ, and ultimately God used Caiaphas. God can take a crooked stick and he can strike a straight blow. Yes, Caiaphas said, why? You don't know anything. Don't you know it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to be destroyed? And if you read on farther, it says, but he didn't say this on his own. But being the high priest in that year, he prophesied about Jesus, that he would not only die for the Jewish nation, but he would die for the people of God that were scattered and bring them together into one. Think about Caiaphas. Where was he at the crucifixion? Was he there at the bottom of the cross taunting Christ? We don't know for sure, but probably he was someplace where it was much cleaner, much holier. But he had reports. He would have giggled with glee that Christ had a crown of thorns on his head, that he was suffering, that he was nailed on the cross, that he was mocked from underneath that cross. And he would have said he deserved every bit of it, because he blasphemed against God. But he wouldn't have liked this report, that Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Nor would he have liked this report when it would have been said to him, the last words that Jesus said were these, "It is finished." That he gave up his own spirit and he died. Think about Caiaphas on Easter morning. Would he have been happy? That was his big day. That was the Passover. And he would be getting ready to be number one. And the veil that separated the holy place, the Holy of Holies in the temple, was torn in two. Then there were reports that the tomb was empty, that Christ was gone. And the disciples were saying, "He is risen." Where would that leave Caiaphas? Doesn't leave him in a very good place, does it? But you know, when Jesus said, "It is finished," something wonderful happened. You remember Adam in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve? Well, God made a covenant with them, and the covenant was simply this, that you are to do my will. You're not to stray from it. But they strayed from it and fell under God's judgment. So when Jesus was on the cross, when Jesus came to this earth, he became the second Adam. And he came to fulfill the will of God that Adam, the first Adam, could not fulfill. And where we failed, he died so that we might have life. The plot failed. Jesus was right when he said to the woman of Samaria in John 4, "Give me a drink." And she said, "Why ask me for a drink? You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan." And he said, "If you knew who was asking you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." And they talked more. And Jesus took that physical water, referring to all the things that we think is more important than God. And he said, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give him will never be thirsty. Indeed, the water that I will give him will rise up into streams of living water." Isn't that wonderful? Absolutely glorious. That our God loves us so much that he would come into this world to give us living water. Let us drink deep of it, and let us rejoice in his goodness and love.